Basically what that is that I'm going to be closing down our physical location once again. We closed it down for 5 months, and then I came back for 2 months, and I'm closing it down again. And then I'm going to go back to the US again. I was there for 5 months, and I want to share my reasoning for that because I think this information is relevant. Basically, I'm a community organizer. I manage this community with more than 1,000 people, and from that with that position, I've been able to kind of kind of observe the mass psychology of what's going on with people, and of course I've taken initiative then to do some of my own research and some statistical analysis. I'm putting that information together, and I believe I've have some ideas about what's coming up that I feel are valuable enough to share. And I know everybody's going to have a different opinion. This is my opinion, so obviously you should. I need to encourage you to look at other sources and see what other information you find. But this is where things are at for me. So I hope this information is useful. Oh, I did have it right. That's weird. Oh, I see. It's flipped. I hope this information is useful for you in some way. Um, so well, what I'm going to do, if you don't know, we do language exchange events, we have language classes, and we have co-working, and we do all of that in person. And then with the shutting things down in person, everything that we can will stay online, which we've been doing online. We have more than 95% of our classes are online right now, and half of our events are online right now. And co-working, I think it's gonna be worth it to try doing co-working online. I think so, because we're definitely closing down the physical co-working option. And yeah, we have not had success with any of the physical things we're doing here in person, so it doesn't make sense to keep the space. But most probably, I'm going to be moving to Houston, Texas, with my sister, and of course, we'll be continuing the events online in the online classes. And I'm going to open up a meetup group in Houston. And so every time we do an event, I'll publish it both in Houston and Mexico City, which I think will result in the events being larger and with a greater balance between native English speakers from the US and native Spanish speakers from Mexico. So I think that's going to be really fun. I'm very excited about that. I think it's going to be great for the community. Perhaps, a really nice innovation. Um, but um, but but so now let's go into some of the more, see, I want to close down the space if I just thought this was going to be temporary. But I think we're in for a little bit of a ride here, in particular in Mexico. So let's kind of talk about that. So first, I just want to remind you guys that um, during the Spanish flu 100 years ago, they didn't have a vaccine, at least as far as I remember, and they had to achieve herd immunity. And herd immunity for that virus was 1/3 of the world's population. Pretty insane, right? So we don't know if coronavirus is going to have the same herd immunity, whether it's going to be 15%, 20%, or 50%. But if we assume that it's going to be very similar to the Spanish flu, let's kind of just go off of that assumption, okay? So let's talk about a couple of good news. Well, pieces of good news. Number one, they did a study in Iceland where they looked for antibodies in 8% of the population, basically at random, and found out that they found out some things. Well, number one, the mortality rate of COVID is about 3 times as much as the seasonal flu. So that now that we're getting more information, oh dear, I haven't shared with you guys my screen. So this was the statistic from the Spanish flu, and then this is the statistic about Iceland. So now that we have more information, I really just don't think people should have ever really been so worried about the unknown of the virus. But now more than ever, we should not be worried about the unknown of the virus because there are fewer unknowns. And one of the things we've discovered is that it seems pretty clear that it's not going to be the rate of mortality is not going to be much greater than 3 times the seasonal flu. So that means that in any year in which we have COVID, we should expect about 4 times as many deaths as we normally would from flu and pneumonia in a normal year. So that's terrible, actually, because that's a lot of people, but it's also not something absolutely insane, at least in my opinion. Um, so now I want to talk a little bit about, well, I want to use the US as an example, and then we're going to talk about Mexico after. So in the US, we have about 330 million people, and this is the state of the virus so far. Supposedly, and we have pretty good data in the US, supposedly 11.5 million people have contracted the virus so far. So if we do the math, that is about 3.5% of the population. But going back to the study from Iceland, this is a different article, they found that 43% of the participants in the study tested positive for antibodies without ever having had any symptoms, which means that for about every 10 people who have COVID, who know they have COVID, there's about another 8 people who have COVID and don't know they have COVID, and maybe never put themselves in quarantine and continue to spread the virus without knowing it. And it wasn't their fault because they had no symptoms, they had no idea. So that's one of the reasons why it's been spreading, the way it has, and why it will continue to spread, as long as there is any kind of human contact going on. Um, so, um, but if we take that 43% figure then, and we go against the 11.5 million, well, we basically can't, well, we can take this figure of 3.5% and we can divide it by 0.43 and we get 8%. So if these official figures are just people who knew they had COVID, don't count the people who never knew they had COVID. The actual number of people, percentage of people in the US who probably have gotten COVID so far is 8%. Again, this is kind of theoretical, so this is, maybe not perfectly accurate, but this is my idea here. So if we are at 8%, but if according to if we need to get to the same herd immunity as we would with Spanish flu, then we need to get to 33%. So let's do the math on that then. So how far are we from herd immunity if we need to get to the same as Spanish flu? Well, we're a quarter of the way, 24%, a quarter, 25% basically, a quarter of the way to herd immunity. So that means that the last 6 months and all the infections that we've seen so far of the virus represent 1/4 of what we will eventually need to get to reach herd immunity. Well, the second piece of good news is that we now know the US has some vaccines that are very effective, a 90% effective vaccine and a 95% effective vaccine, but it will take time to both produce and distribute that vaccine. So supposedly in December, they're going to start to vaccinate the medical personnel. In January, they're going to start to vaccinate the people at highest risk, and that's going to take several months, probably 3 to 4 months. So maybe in March or April, we're going to start to see a turnaround with the death rate. The death rate should hopefully go down, and hopefully even as early as April, we can start to see things come back to normal a little bit in the US. However, people will still continue to spread it like wildfire, and eventually a lot more people who aren't as high risk will get vaccinated as well. And it'll take maybe a fully 9 months or a year to really get to a point where, okay, it's pretty much kind of gone if the vaccine goes all as planned. But I do want to talk about the virus almost as if there's no vaccine, because the question with Mexico is how long will it take for Mexico to have the vaccine to oh, that was weird. I had a little notification. I don't know what that meant. But how long will it take Mexico to receive the vaccine, produce it, and distribute it in force enough to make an effect and curb the growth of the virus? That's the $1,000,000 question that this video does not answer at all. I have very little information on that, very little knowledge. I've done a little bit of research, but it's something that's kind of difficult to find the answer to from the research I've done, and I'm curious what you guys would know about it. But I did talk to a Mexican friend yesterday, and he thinks that it's going to take till the end of next year to get to that point. And another friend who's a scientist who's been being interviewed by a lot of news organizations in both Mexico and the US over the past months, and become kind of a little bit of a semi-celebrity and expert on this. She's actually corroborated my prediction, and I believe it's going to take about 9 months for Mexico to turn a corner. I think it's going to get worse with an increase of cases. It's going to get continuously worse until it gets better, and I think that time is going to be about 9 months. It could be as short as 6, could be as long as 12. Um, you know, and she believes she said that that sounds like a fairly accurate prediction. Of course, it's still a prediction. Neither she nor I know the future. Nobody knows the future. It's prediction based on the data that we have, and also some of the psychological observations I've made with the people in our community. So to continue, um, let's just go back to the US. So if we need to multiply this number by 4, if we're increasing at a rate of about 20% right now, we can do a calculation here. So we do the angle is 20%, the length is 6 months, and that has gotten us to this amount. Okay, that's the area, which represents the 25 million Americans who have already been infected, according to my theory that I shared. So if we multiply that by 4, well, it's 25. It's closer to 25 million. So let's go down to the area being 25 million and keep the same angle at 20 to determine the new length, which will be 11.72. So basically 12 months. So what that would suggest is that if we continue at the same exact 20% rate, we're going to keep going up and up and up for an additional 6 months, and then it's going to chop off precipitously. Well, obviously that's not going to happen, because what's going to really more like happen is it's going to keep going up, and then it's going to start to level off, and then it's going to start to go down. And that's going to elongate it and prolong the graph so that we're not going to be in this for just another 6 months, but probably another year before we get back down to these levels. But obviously we will all start to celebrate when we get to the point that we're turning the corner. Once we start to turn that corner, it starts to get better. That's going to be a time for celebration, I believe. But looking also at the waves, we had the first wave. The second wave is already more than double the size of the first wave. So if we think about it, if it's going to go on this trend, 20%, and start to level off and then eventually go in a degradation, I believe that the third wave is going to be larger than the second wave. And there's even a possibility of the fourth wave being larger or the similar size to the third wave. But hopefully the fourth wave will come back down again and be similar to the size of this wave right now. And then each wave after that will be less until we're hopefully kind of symmetrical graph and we're back to here, maybe a year from now. So that's kind of not factoring in the vaccine. But the vaccine, before we start to see a curbing effect from the vaccine, is probably going to be another 4 months. So because each wave takes about 3 months, we're in the middle of a large wave. If it takes another 3 months to get to the third wave, that might be much bigger. And right now we already have some hospitals overflowing in the US. My sister-in-law, or my stepsister, and her whole family just got it, and not all of them could get all of the medical attention that they wanted. I mean, of course, there were worse cases than theirs, but so they couldn't go to the hospital, they couldn't stay, and I've heard of other hospitals kind of being pretty much at capacity. I think the US is, for the most part, still doing pretty okay with capacity, but I believe that if there's when the third wave comes, I think that we're going to be really stretched thin on that capacity, and that's going to be a really, really hard time for the US. And hopefully right about that time, the vaccines will start having their effect, and that's going to be the last bad moment, hopefully. But that's the US. So let's go to Mexico. Mexico's population is 126 million. According to official data, we're at less than 1% of the people infected. So if we go by the theory of the Icelandic study, probably it's closer to 2%, 2.5% actual infected, but maybe it's even more. They started about a month later than we did it in the US. We started in about April, they started in May. So it's been kind of considered that, oh, Mexico's probably about a month behind the US, but their graph is a little more different. It seems the government has been a little bit more cautious and has cracked down harder than the US government. So that's why it hasn't been as dramatic as the US graph. Um, but it's but even if we're pretty generous and we say, oh, maybe Mexico's at the same amount of infected as the US at 7%, 8%, well then, and I don't know what the heck is going on with this data right here. This seems very unusual. It isn't very accurate to me, but because cases are higher than ever right now, and it's saying that's going really low. But like I know personally people here in Mexico who have the virus, or who, more so friends of friends. Um, I'm hearing more and more about that. I'm sure you are as well. So, um, so we're about to enter into the red lockdown state here, and they're going to lock it down. Last red lockdown was 4 months long. This one we're hoping will be only 1 or 2 months. But eventually, they're inevitably going to have to return to orange lockdown, which is where we're at now. And I believe that for every wave, they're basically going to go back and forth between red and orange, and they can't stay in red forever because it's destroying the economy. People are really, really suffering economically, and the longer this prolongs, the worse it is for people. I was talking with somebody yesterday who told me he has restaurant owner friends who, if they said to him, if the government closes me down, that's it for me permanently. Um, so a lot of people are struggling right now, and that's just restaurant owners, let alone the street vendors and construction workers and everybody. So it's a tough time. Um, but every time that Mexico opens up to orange, we're going to see an increase in cases, according to the math that I was sharing here, um, according to my prediction anyway, if my prediction is correct. So if it takes a long time for Mexico to get the vaccine, I just only see this situation as prolonging for a very long time, 6 to 12 months, probably closer to 9 months. And that's why I don't see it as a good investment to be doing any physical events, in-person classes here. I'd rather focus entirely online for our Mexico business for the next year, and um, and be with family so that I'm not completely alone. So now I want to kind of like come back and just do a little bit of a message, some advice. So especially if you're a foreigner, um, or if you live alone, or if you're Mexican and you don't really feel like your family is really good to you or a good influence on you, well, I do think we really need to band together. I think now is a great time to band together and help each other. And also, just let's try to think realistically about making a plan based on the probable future as opposed to the hopeful one. A lot of people Mexicans and all kinds of people try to think positively, and it's awesome. But don't kick the can down the road. A lot of people have been kicking the can down the road from the beginning. They said, oh, this is only going to be 1 month or 2 months or 3 months. And they made plans based on that projection, and then they were hoping that it was going to get better, but it didn't. And when they got there, they said, "Oh, hopefully another 2 or 3 months it'll be better," and it wasn't. So my question for you is: are you making economic plans for the next 9 months of a depression? Are you making social plans of the next 9 months of going back and forth between orange and red? If you don't know, in red semáforo, what that means is that they're going to close all gyms, all movie theaters. No restaurants will allow anything besides carry out and delivery. Parks are at 50% now. They're supposedly going down to 25%. But more importantly, the social perception. Here in Mexico, I've noticed that Mexican people tend to cling to their families during times of crisis. And honestly, they from what I've seen, it seems that they might forget about their friends, or they might forget about the foreigners, or they might forget about people that they haven't realized. Oh, this person is living alone, or this person is going to be pretty lonely in this time, or this person doesn't really have good family around them, or an abusive family even. So um, I think we need to try to think about each other and not just think about the physical health side of things either, but the mental side as well. So that's why I'm planning on continuing to do about 2 events per week for the next 9 months personally, But hopefully, I would really, really love if you guys would also contribute, and the more people in our community that can organize events, wouldn't it be amazing if we can have an event every single night of the week? Whether it be a discussion, a watch party, a game night, whatever it might be, so that nobody ever has to feel alone if they don't want to, and we can do something continuously, right? That's number one, continuing the things online. Um, and number two is, let's be realistic here. Uh, I'm not going to tell you don't keep yourself shut in forever alone, but yes, I am, because that's kind of not maybe the most realistic or best idea. You know, can you think of three friends who you can make a pact with and say, hey, we're not going to expose ourselves to anybody else but ourselves, or maybe to very few people besides ourselves, and let's commit to seeing each other once a week or even twice a week in person, even if you're not completely satisfied with the online option, or if you get sick of it. And I think we might have to take a little bit of risk, and that's a very small risk, in exchange for the massive psychological benefit, of having people that care about you, and being able to have contact with those people. Um, Not even talking about the difficulty of networking for businesses, but the necessity of having some sort of socialization going for people's mental health. So, um, yeah, my encouragement is don't isolate, but to come up with good plans to continue socializing, continue connecting, continue helping each other. And I hope to be there too to help with that as much as I can. And I also have needs too. But anyway, um, and uh, and yeah, if you're not in Mexico, my personal recommendation is probably, if you're in the U.S., stay there. If you're in a country that's developing a vaccine, probably stay there. And if you're in Mexico, you might want to consider this and weigh the information, see what's the best for you. Um, But yeah, okay. Well, I think that's about it. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this was useful and helpful. Again, measured against the other sources, but I hope to see you guys in the events. So catch you soon.